Bienvenidos, Ushamdi, and welcome Anne Arundel Community College learners from the Spring 2023 semester taking the CTS-233 Section 400 Network Programmability course. This is the Cisco Networking Academy's DEVASC 200-901 Certification Exam Preparation course, and in this tutorial for Lab 7.6.3, where we're taking a look at automated testing using pyATS and Genie. Now, this video is going to focus on the pyATS component, which is parts 1 through 3, but there is a lot going on here. I'm going to show you some very simple examples first before we dive into what's actually going to be taking place in the lab. So what are you going to learn how to do? You're going to learn how to use pyATS to create tests. We're going to be able to clone 2 GitHub repos that have some really nice use cases in them. And we're going to be creating a Python virtual environment. If you didn't do that initially in Lab 3.1.12, now would be a good time to take a look at Lab 3.1.12 and the videos that I put together for that. But let's go ahead and let's dive in and get started here. So here we are in the labs devnet source pyATS directory. Now, you do not need to be on the DevASC virtual machine to do this. You can do everything I'm doing here on your own little Ubuntu install as long as you've got the correct tools installed and ready to go. So we're in this pyATS directory, and so what we're going to be doing, I've already created the pyATS directory and we're already in here, so we're going to skip that step. We're going to go right into the creation, into the creation of the Python virtual machine. So we're going to say Python 3 minus v, or minus m, venv, and then the name of that Python virtual environment. So we're going to call it CSR1KV. Now I'm going to hit enter. It's going to create that for us, and it's going to create a directory as well. So when I say ls-la, you can see we've got the CSR1KV directory right there. Now they want us to go ahead and cd into CSR1KV and do a quick ls-l where we're going to see some additional files. Now again, this should be reviewed from Lab 3.1.12, and let's take a look at that py virtual environment file, right? And they want us to see what are the configuration variables, environment variables that are being used here. So home is user bin. We're not going to be including system site packages, but we're using Python version 3.8.10. So basically what the pyvenv file is doing for us is it's defining where is the Python installation I'm going to be using. Well, it's in user bin and our version is 3.8.10. Now, if we were to take a look at the symbolic link here, doing an ls dash, and I think they have it as a 1, user bin Python. And you can see that it's going to put it in list form for us because we're using that -1, and that's not an L. And so it lists the file, each one at a time, and that's what that 1 gives us. And so then you can see there that here are the Python binaries that we're going to be using. Again, if I was to take a look at ls-l on bin, and again, this is the bin in the current working directory that I'm in right here, the CSR1KV. If I say ls, you can see we have a bin directory right here. So we're looking at that bin, and you can see all of the files that are in here. Specifically, we've got these 2 symbolic links, right? So when we're in the virtual environment, when we've activated the virtual environment, we're going to be referencing these Python executables, right? And we're getting all of that from the bin directory, but it's also in that Python venv file that we had looked at earlier. The config file. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's activate our virtual environment. So we'll say bin activate. Remember, to deactivate this, we would simply say deactivate, but remember, when we see that preceding our CLI prompt, that means we are in this Python virtual environment. And again, to get out of here, I would just say deactivate, right? And then, you can see it goes away from the beginning of the prompt, and then we'll source it again, and then here we are back in the Python virtual environment. Okay, so one of the things that we need to do, if you remember, if we were to say, and I'm drawing a blank all of a sudden, if we were to say pip3 freeze, sorry about that, I froze, pun intended. So if I was to say pip3 freeze, it's going to show me what's installed here, right? So if I was to say, pip3 install requests, and install the requests for HTTP, and if I ran that pip3 freeze again, we should see, oh, hey, look at this. I've got the things I need to do to use the requests library. When I first ran it, there was nothing here because we don't have anything installed in our virtual environment. So let's say pip3 install, and we're going to install the full pyATS library of features and functionality. Now, this takes about 5 seconds, but once it's done, we're going to be able to run some interesting pyATS commands. Now, Genie is sort of like a superset, and I just shouldn't say superset, but Genie is kind of like an extension to pyATS in the sense that it allows us to do some things that we normally wouldn't do with pyATS, right? So it's got some extended functionality, and we'll talk about Genie in the following video as I'm burning time here, and we can ignore those errors right there. We're still going to get the pyATS install as soon as this wraps up here, and taking a little bit longer than I had anticipated. And we've got the setup coming down here. Come on, pyATS. All right, it is definitely dragging here for some reason. And again, your mileage may vary. I think I may have a backup job that's kicking off right now. All right, there we go. Okay, so if I say pyATS --help, this is again going to give me that abbreviated look at all of the different options I've got here and the different commands I can use with pyATS. All right, so, and you can run, in order to see something for a specific command, you can say pyATS logs and --help. And you're definitely going to see the use of logs here. All right, so now we're going to clone a GitHub repository. In fact, we're going to clone 2 GitHub repositories. So the first one we're going to grab, and this is going to have all of the code that we need in order to do the lab, and then we're going to take a look at some additional pyATS code. So it's going to be github.com/Cisco test automation /examples. All right, so we're going to clone that repo, and then the next repo we're going to clone is going to be git clone. And again, you can do all of this without being on the DEVASC virtual machine. So if you're following along with your Ubuntu virtual machine, you can do this as well. Cisco devnet /pyats -sample -scripts.get. And so that is also going to clone a GitHub repository for us that we will be using as well. So now if I say ls-l, you can see here is the lab directory, the examples. That's the first repo that we cloned. And then you've got pyATS sample scripts, which is another repo that we cloned. And again, the directory gets auto-magically created when you clone that GitHub repo. And inside of those directories, let's take a look at examples. If I said ls-l, ls-la, you'll notice that the .git file, right, the git repo file is already here. So if I was to say git status, yep, we're up to date, right? Because we just cloned this repo. So we've got these 2 directories. And hold on one second, is there a basic? Yeah, they want us to take a look at the basic directory here. So we'll say ls-l on basic. And you can see that those are the 2 files that we've got. We've got a basic example job, and we'll talk about what that job is, right? It's basically the compilation of a series of tests or files that are running tests. Here we just have this one, so it's not a big deal. And the one that we're interested in is basic_example_script. So if we take a look at that, basic_example_script, .py, and I must have a typo in there. Yeah, I'm not in that basic directory. That would also help. All right, so if I said basic example script.py. Now, they refer to this as basic. However, there is a lot that's going on in here, right? And you can see the lab kind of points out some of this stuff. We're going to come in here and take a closer look at this in a second. But what we want to do first, right, is we want to start with some simple examples of what a pyATS testing script may look like. So we're going to come back to that basic example script in just a second here where they break down things into different sections. So let's first take a look at 001 dot simple pyATS test, right? So here's a simple example of a test. We're going to import from pyATS, we're going to import AE test. And again, we're importing that functionality because we're going to subclass AE test.test case. And again, remember what that means is we import AE test, and from it, we get this test case class, all the attributes and all the features and functionality. We get all of that. And the way we reference it here in this test file, and this is something that's common that you're going to see, is we're going to be using decorators. Remember, a decorator is nothing more than the icing on top of what we referred to previously as the function cake, but here we're using a class, and so the decorator is the icing on the method cake. Remember, methods and functions look identical. It's just that functions can be run independently all on their own, whereas methods are inextricably linked to the class, right? So here I'm going to be referring to the decorator as the icing on the method cake. And when we're using AE test and it runs, and I've got this commented out right now, but when it runs and it goes to run the test, it's going to be referencing and determining the order in which these things are executed, these methods are executed or called based on the decorator. So that's the function of the decorator here. So AE test knows to run the setup method first because it's decorated with AE test.setup. And again, you can see that it's doing nothing more here than just a print statement, right? We want to start simple with some examples that we could see and understand. And so this is just setting up the test environment, and it's going to run that method first because it is decorated with the AE test.setup. So then after the setup is run, it's going to run methods that are decorated with AE test.test. And so then it knows, oh, okay, well, here's my test method. And it knows that that's a test method because it starts with test underscore as well. And then it just says running test. And then for cleanup, we know that AE test.cleanup is going to run last and it's going to clean things up. Again, this is just a simple sort of skeleton here that we can use. So if I was to say pytest on 001-sample example, and you can see here, no test ran, because again, there's nothing that we're testing here, right? We're not testing anything. And again, I've got this commented out here down below. This is not really a functional script per se, but it's to get us started here by looking at a Python module where we can see, oh, okay, this is what decorators are. Here's how they're used when we're using pyATS and executing things with pytest. And again, the decorator is dictating the order of operations as to which method is called first, second, and then third. So again, I could mix the order of these up. I could have the AE test.test decorator up here with its method. I could have that listed first, but it won't matter because AE test knows that it's running things based on the decorators that are being used. All right, so that's our first example. So now let's go ahead and take a look at a functional example. And we'll say 002. So here is a functional example, right? We import pytest and we have a list. And so I'm going to define this list. And here we're seeing another decorator, a different decorator type. And this is called the pytest.mark.parameterize. And what this is going to do is it's going to check to see, is the element that I've listed over here in this list, right? So we've got this list here. Are these elements in that list? And so we've got a simple assert. Remember we talked earlier in the unit test examples where with pyATS and pytest, we're looking to use assert, right? So here's assert element in my list. So this is just asserting that whatever the element is, and it's gonna go through each of these one at a time. So it's going to check to see, is the integer 1 an element in my list? Is the integer 3 an element in my list? Is the integer 2? And you get the idea here, right? So it's just iterating over the elements in this list right here to determine, are they in this main list? So here's another way that we can run pyTest. So I could say, I could say pyTest 002 and take a look at that. And here we are having tests run. In fact, if I do a -v with pyTest, and on this one it'll make a difference because it's actually doing something, we can see that, oh, okay, take a look here. Test check is 1 in the list. Yeah, that passed. Is 3. So we're checking 4 things, 25% each time. Well, let's break this. So let's go into 002, into this file here, and let's put in an element that doesn't actually exist in here. And in fact, I could even change the number of elements that are in here, and let's check for 222 or 2222. Now that is definitely not in the list. So when we run that with the -v with pyTest, you can see that pyTest is going to tell us, hey, 1 test failed and 2 tests passed. Well, what's going on there? Well, there you go. The assert here, right, we're looking 2222 is not in the list that we're checking. Okay, so that's another kind of simple example, taking a look at pyTest, right? And so now let's take a look at a final third example here that's going to be a little bit more complex. And this is again using from pyATS, we're importing AE-test, and you've got your decorators, right? We've got the class, we've subclassed out the AE-test test case class, and we are decorating the methods in that class in order to dictate the order in which these things are executed or called, right? These methods get called. So you can see here, we've got setup at the top, we've got cleanup second, we've got AE-test third. And so it's going to basically check to see, we're making these assertions here. Is the length of the list 3? Is Arsenal in the list? It is. Is Man City in the list? It is. Is Liverpool in the list? It is. And so it would check those things. So now that we have a better understanding, right? Hopefully, we take this incremental approach here and we look at some smaller examples, and that's going to prepare us for what we're about to see here, which is in the CSR1KV. And we want to go into, examples, and we're going to go into basic. And again, the basic example here is a little bit more busy than normal. And actually, wait a second, hold on. We've got example, and what are the two? Oh yeah, script. So let's take a look at their script, right? So logging. They're going to use logging here, right? So again, just adding another layer of functionality into this pyATS test script here, needed for AES test script, right? So from pyATS, import ATS. So we're bringing in the logging functionality. We're bringing in ATS. We know we've got to have that. And so here we just create a log object, right? From logging.getLogger, and then the dunder name is the name of our script. So here's the common setup section, right? And this is typically what you'll see in larger scripts, right? So this is how to create a common setup. So we have this class that we create, that's our class name, and we subclass AE-test.commonSetup. Now, you should be very comfortable with looking at this and saying, oh, right. So AE-test before we did the test case, well, now we're just grabbing the common setup stuff. Well, what can we do here in the common setup? Well, we've got our subsection with a decorator, AE-test.subsection, indicating that, yeah, this method is the common setup subsection. And then we've got log.info, and that's what we're going to be providing for the logging info. And then we've got a second subsection, right? So these are common setup tasks, and we've broken it down into 2 subsections. And we know which subsections we're running, right, or calling because of the decorators. All right, let's continue through. Because again, these decorators are inextricably linked to that AE-test class that we're inheriting from. All right, now we've got our test case section. Well, what's going on in the test case section? Well, here you can see again, we create a TC_1, test case 1, and we subclass AETest.testCase, which is what we were doing in the previous really simple, easy to understand examples. And so what is this going to do? Well, we've got our setup here. So we're going to prepare the test case. We're going to add some logging in there. And now we have our first test section. And there's the decorator AETest.test. The second test section is, again, the decorator with AETest.test. And then we've got our method that's getting called there. And then finally, and you can do this, we can clean up the testing within the test that's being run, right? So here we're doing some basic cleanup. However, what you're about to see is we get to test case number 2, and this test case runs, and then it gets cleaned up. And then there's a common cleanup section, right? So whatever didn't get cleaned up when we ran the specific test cases up here and did the cleanup, the common cleanup is going to come through. And then you can see we've got our common cleanup, and we subclass AETest.common cleanup so that we can say at AETest subsection for the cleanup that's taking place here. And we do any cleanup that needs to be done. And so again, hopefully taking a look at the simple examples made this a little bit more understandable. Now, the next thing we want to do is we want to take a look at that, the pyATS, the job file. And it was basic example job.py. Okay, so what is this doing? So when we create the job, if we have one or more pyATS scripts that we're going to be running, we can compile them all into a job. Think of it as like a wrapper script, right? That we create this file here, basic_example_job.py. And in here, we're going to call or run all of the pyATS testing Python scripts that we've created, right? So what are we doing here? You can see we import OS because that's going to help us locate the files that we're running. And then we've got from pyats.easypy import run. And you'll notice that that's where we get this run method down here telling it, hey, run, and the name of the test script or the test script that we're running is going to be assigned the value of test script, which is simply finding that basic example script, right? So this variable named test script is assigned the value of our basic example script using the path that we're going to join with that script name. So we're going to provide the path name there. And so we want to make sure that we're in the CSR1KV, right? Because test path is going to get the directory name using the dunder file, which is going to give us the name of the path, which is going to be examples, and I'm trying to figure this out, examples/basic is what it should be. So it should give us, we should get that examples_basic when it finds that file in the directory. So yeah, so the dunder_file should be the name of this file, this basic example basic_example_job, and we're finding that, right? The directory name of that test path, and then we're going to append that, or I should say prepend that path, that directory path, which is examples basic, to that script right there. So we don't want to be here when we run this. We want to be back up here when we run this. And so I should be able to say pyATS, and we'll do it both ways, run job. And again, this is that jobs file, and I'm saying examples_basic, and this is where that dunder file should be getting this test_path variable value from. And then we'll say /basic_example_job.py. All right, so we're going to kick this off, and you can see we're getting lots of good information here. all kinds of things flying around. Now, you can see it says try the following command to view your logs. And this is one of the pro tips they put at the end. So pyATS logs view. And there was a failure in here, but it was pre-canned, right? They wanted it to fail. So when I go to view the logs, if I say pyATS view, take a look at this. It's going to give us sort of a GUI representation of the log. So I can click on that and you can see, oh, okay, well, what happened? All right, well, it looks like in test case number 2, I had a failure. And it was the simple test 1, that was my failure. And this is an internal failure, right? But TC1, hey, look at that. Prepared the test case, ran simple test case 1 and 2, the clean test case, everything looks good. Those passed, but that is where my mistake is. And again, on the CLI, if we were to scroll back up here, we should see, and hopefully I don't blow by it, and there you go, success rate 75%, right? So it's running its test, but my failure is, here we go. All right, we finally made it up to the failure section. There it is. Okay, so failed, reason, this is an internal failure. The result of section simple underscore test underscore 1 failed, right? But again, remember, this was pre-canned to fail on us. Okay, so if we go back into that script, oh, and I'm sorry, let me do, and so I'm just exiting out there from showing logs, because when you run that command, if you don't put it into the background, it's going to take control of the terminal from you. So that jobs script, and actually we're not even in that directory, so let's get into examples and basic, and we want to take a look at, more, and let's take a look at the, we want the example script. So we'll say basic example script, and there we go. And so if we were to come down to test case number 2, and here's our test case section. So there's test case 1, and let's come down to test case 2, and this is where we have our failure. And this is where we have our failure, and you can see it's predetermined that is going to say self.failed. If I didn't want it to say failure, how could we fix this, right? Let's see if this actually works. So let's vi basic underscore example underscore script, and let's fly down to the failed section here. Oops, sorry, to the failed section, and I'm going to move over here. And what if I comment that out? Because now that test case looks a lot like this log info. This test case here, simple test 1 under test case 2, looks a lot like simple test 2, where I just commented out this failure, right? And now we just have the log info. So let's save this and let's run it and let's see if in fact that sorts things out. Whoops, sorry. And then let's pull this back up here for our our pyATS run example. So now when this runs through, the failure is no longer in there, right? We've commented it out, and there we go. We didn't see anything red, so let's go ahead and say pyATS logs view. And when we get the little GUI pop up here, there's our 6th run of that, right? You can see we've got a timestamp and everything. We click on it and take a look at that. Test case 1 works, test case 2 works, and we understand why it works, and we understand why it failed before. I kind of chuckled at the beginning of the lab when it said, you don't really need to understand the code. And it's like, well, I think that's kind of misleading. It's always good to kind of understand what it is your code is doing, the code that you're executing, what that code is doing. All right, well, that is our pyATS piece of Lab 763. Next up, we're going to extend the functionality of what we're doing by creating a testbed YAML file, and we're going to be using Genie. All right, as always, thank you so much for watching. I hope this video is clearing things up for you with respect to pyATS, and as always, I hope to see you in the next video.